Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sleepy Shadows. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and fall asleep. If today was long or heavy, I'll do my best to make your night a little more comfortable with these stories. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy calm, quiet horror stories like these, you're welcome to subscribe. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. It was the year 2002, and I was hitchhiking around the United States. That period of my life feels distant now, almost unreal, like something that belonged to another version of me. I didn't have a fixed plan or a clear destination most of the time. I was moving with the seasons, following conversations, chance encounters, and word-of-mouth rumors about gatherings and places where people would meet, camp, share food, music, and stories. At that time, I was on my way to a rainbow gathering in the Mark Twain National Forest, just outside of Ironton, Missouri. For anyone unfamiliar, these gatherings often happen deep in forests, far from towns, and locations are intentionally kept vague. You don't just drive straight to them. You're guided by subtle signs, small landmarks, and directions passed quietly from person to person. That night, I wasn't traveling alone. I had linked up with a couple of other hitchhikers along the way, and we were all trying to reach the same place. By the time we finally made it to the state road that led into the forest, it was already around 11 at night. The road itself was narrow and quiet, surrounded by thick woods on either side. No houses, no street lights, just darkness stretching endlessly in every direction. We knew we were close, but that was also part of the problem. The final directions involved following small, stacked stone cairns placed discreetly along the forest edge to guide people toward the seed camp location. During the day, they're easy enough to spot if you know what you're looking for. At night, they might as well not exist. The moonlight wasn't enough, and our flashlights only illuminated bits of road and underbrush. After a short while, it became clear that continuing forward in the dark would be pointless and potentially dangerous. So we decided to pull over on the side of the road and wait until morning. We found a spot that felt as safe as anything else out there. Just off the road, but not too far into the woods. We laid out our sleeping bags, settled in, and prepared for an uncomfortable but manageable night. None of us expected anything unusual. At most, we thought we'd hear insects, maybe some distant animal sounds. The forest at night is usually alive in a very predictable way. That's not what happened. At some point after we had settled down, I became aware of a sound that didn't fit. At first, I thought I was half dreaming. The noise seemed distant, like something carried on the wind. High-pitched voices, laughter, the kind of sounds children make when they're playing outside. I lay there listening, trying to place it. It sounded like kids running around. Dozens of them. Maybe more. There was a rhythm to it, like a playground during recess. Shouts, giggles, quick bursts of excitement. The kind of noise that would normally be comforting, even cheerful. Except for one problem. We were miles from the nearest public road. We were deep in the forest, on BLM land, far away from any towns, houses, or campsites. There was no playground, no school, no neighborhood, and certainly no reason for children to be out there at night, let alone that many of them. I sat up in my sleeping bag and listened more carefully. The sounds didn't fade. They didn't drift away. They stayed consistent, echoing through the trees. I looked around to see if anyone else had noticed. But one of the others was awake too. Our eyes met in the darkness, and without speaking, I knew they were hearing the same thing. We whispered back and forth, asking each other if we were imagining it. None of us were. The noises continued all night. Sometimes they seemed closer, sometimes farther away, but they never stopped completely. There were moments when the laughter dipped, only to rise again somewhere else. It was as if something unseen was moving through the forest, carrying the sounds with it. No footsteps, no rustling branches, just voices. At one point, I remember thinking maybe there was another camp nearby. Maybe some families had arrived early with kids. But the longer the night went on, the less sense that made. No lights, no fire, no adult voices. Just children. Eventually, exhaustion overtook fear, and I must have slept in short, uneasy stretches. When morning finally came, I felt drained and unsettled, like I hadn't rested at all. With daylight, everything looked more normal. The forest was beautiful in that quiet, early morning way. Birds started calling. The road looked ordinary again. It was tempting to convince myself that the night had played tricks on us. We gathered our things and set out to find the seed camp location. Once we followed the cairns in daylight, it didn't take long. We found the clearing and began settling in. At that early stage, there were maybe a dozen people there, just the ones who arrived early to help set up the site before the gathering reached its peak. Over time, the numbers would grow, eventually reaching around 150 people. But for now, it was quiet and calm. Or the unease from the night before lingered, but it wasn't something we talked about much. It felt strange to bring it up in the daylight, like saying it out loud might give it more power than it deserved. A day or so later, a few of us decided to wander into the surrounding hills. We were looking for firewood and possibly a fresh spring where we could collect water. That was common at these gatherings. People would explore the area, learning the land, finding resources, getting a sense of the place. We moved slowly through the woods, following animal paths and natural breaks in the terrain. The forest felt old and quiet, like it had been watching humans come and go for a very long time. There was no sense of danger, just a deep stillness. Then we found the foundation. It was in the middle of the woods, not near any visible road or trail. At first glance, it looked like a simple arrangement of stones, low to the ground and partially covered by leaves and moss. As we got closer, it became clear that it was the foundation of a house that had once stood there. The house itself had been gone for a long time, long enough that trees had grown up where rooms once existed. Decent-sized trees, not saplings. Their roots twisted through the stones, claiming the space entirely. There were a few rotted boards scattered around, barely recognizable as lumber. Some rusted nails and bits of metal lay half-buried in the forest floor. They must have been part of the structure once, holding walls and floors together. Naturally, we became curious. Old places sometimes hide interesting remnants. Bottles, tools, personal items. We thought maybe we'd find something like that. So we spread out a bit and looked closer. That's when we found the first shoe. It was small, a child's shoe. Worn and partially rotted, sunk into the soil. At first, it didn't strike me as particularly strange. Old houses sometimes have old belongings nearby. Then we found another, and another, and another. They weren't in a neat pile. They were scattered, but not randomly. Within a radius of maybe 25 feet around the foundation, there were children's shoes everywhere. Different sizes, different styles. Some were old-fashioned leather shoes, the kind kids might have worn decades ago. Some were plastic jelly shoes, the kind that were popular in the 1980s. Some looked relatively new. Others looked like they'd been there for generations. The deeper we looked, the worse it got. We found half-decayed garbage bags filled with shoes, but hundreds of them, stuffed together, breaking down into the earth, the plastic clinging to soles and straps, the shoes themselves blending into the forest floor. There were no adult shoes, no clothing, no toys, no appliances, no tools, no signs of dumping trash or household waste, just children's shoes. The mood shifted instantly. No one joked anymore. No one spoke much at all. We stood there, surrounded by evidence of something we couldn't understand, feeling small and deeply uncomfortable. I thought back to the night on the road. The sounds we had heard, the laughter, the voices. I didn't say anything, but I knew others were thinking it, too. There was no logical explanation that made sense, not really. Why would someone collect children's shoes and bring them deep into the forest? Why were they spread around an old foundation? Oh, and nowhere else? Why were there so many, spanning what looked like different eras? Eventually, someone suggested we leave. No one argued. We walked back to camp in silence. The gathering went on as planned. People came, people left. Music played, food was shared. On the surface, everything was normal. But that place never felt the same to me after that. I don't know what happened there. I don't know who lived in that house, or why those shoes were there, or what the sounds in the night really were. I don't know if they were connected, or if my mind stitched them together out of fear. All I know is that some things don't need explanations to feel wrong. And that forest, in that place, held something I didn't want to understand any better than I already did. A few years ago, I went to visit my dad for the summer. He lived far up north in Minnesota, in a quiet area where nights felt longer and heavier than anywhere else I had lived. The kind of place where once the sun goes down, everything seems to hold its breath. There were trees everywhere, long empty roads, and a deep silence that settled in after dark. During the day, the house felt normal enough. At night, it felt different, still. Too still. The house itself wasn't very big, but it was old and not very well insulated. The walls were thin, so thin that you could hear almost everything. Footsteps from the other side of the house, someone opening a door, even someone shifting their weight on the floor. Because of that, you always knew where everyone was. There were no surprises in that house, or at least there weren't supposed to be. I slept in the guest bedroom during my stay. I never really liked that room, though I couldn't explain why. It just felt exposed. The layout didn't help. My bed was placed against one wall, and to the right of it was an open closet. Inside the closet was a large mirror. The mirror faced directly toward my bed, meaning that if I turned my head even slightly, I could see my reflection. The bedroom door was at the foot of the bed, perfectly aligned so that everything in the room felt connected in an uncomfortable way. Bed, door, mirror, all in line. I tried not to think about it. That night, I went to bed like usual. Nothing strange had happened earlier in the evening. My dad was watching TV in the living room. My older brother was in his room, and the house was quiet. I fell asleep without any trouble. Then I woke up, and I remember the time clearly because I checked my phone. It was 2:54 in the morning. I hadn't woken up from a dream. There was no loud noise. I just woke up suddenly, fully aware, staring into the darkness. My body felt alert in a way that didn't make sense for the middle of the night. I lay there for a moment, annoyed. I knew falling back asleep wouldn't be easy. I reached for my iPod, which I kept on the bed with me, and decided to listen to music. Music usually helped calm my mind enough to drift off again. When I checked the battery, it was at 4%. I stared at it, debating with myself. The charger was right there, just a couple of feet away. I could have leaned over, plugged it in, and saved myself the trouble. But I was tired, lazy, and already half comfortable. Instead of getting up, I decided to just lie there and deal with the boredom until sleep came back. I rolled onto my other side, facing away from the closet, and closed my eyes. That's when I heard the doorknob. At first, it was a small sound, a soft jiggling, like someone lightly testing the handle. I froze immediately. My eyes flew open and I stared toward the door. The sound continued, more urgent now, like someone was trying to open the door quietly but failing. My heart started racing. Then the jiggling stopped. The door slowly opened a few inches. I stared at that narrow gap in the door, my mind scrambling for an explanation. My first thought was my older brother. He liked messing with people, and it wouldn't be out of character for him to try to scare me. I told myself that's all it was, just him being an idiot. Trying to convince myself it wasn't serious, I closed my eyes again. Almost immediately, I heard footsteps. They were heavy footsteps, not sneaky, not light. The sound of a grown person walking with purpose. I heard them move past the foot of my bed. Each step was clear, deliberate, slow. Then the footsteps stopped somewhere in the middle of the room. My eyes opened again without me even thinking about it. I looked back at the door. It was still only open a few inches. No shadow crossed it. No movement. Just that same narrow crack. That's when I felt it. A deep, heavy feeling settled over me, starting at my back and spreading through my body. It felt like someone was standing very close to me, watching me. Not from across the room. Right there. Close enough to reach out and touch me. Fear flooded me all at once. I shut my eyes tight and slowly pulled the blanket up over my head and shoulders. I didn't want to make noise. I didn't want to move too fast. I was terrified that whatever was in the room would react if I did. I lay there completely still. My body felt frozen. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. I could barely breathe. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard across the house. Time stopped making sense. Seconds stretched into something that felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. I stayed there under the blanket, listening, waiting, hoping nothing would happen. Eventually, fear gave way to desperation. I needed to know. With shaking hands, I slowly lowered the blanket just enough to peek out. I opened my eyes and turned my head toward the closet mirror. What I saw made my blood run cold. In the mirror, I could see the silhouette of a large man standing right next to my bed. He wasn't standing upright. His upper body was crouched forward, like he was leaning down to get a better look at me. One arm was extended, reaching toward where I lay. There were no details, no face, no clothing, just a dark, solid shape that did not belong in that room. I have never felt terror like that in my life. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I started frantically patting the bed in front of me, searching for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely feel anything. I finally touched it, and, in my panic, accidentally pressed the play button instead of unlocking it. Music exploded into the silence. Taylor Swift's Love Story started playing at full volume. The sound startled me so badly I almost dropped the phone. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. But through the panic, I forced myself to look back at the mirror. The silhouette was gone. The space beside my bed was empty. The mirror showed nothing except my own terrified face. The door was still cracked open, but there was no movement, no sound. I didn't stop the music. I turned the volume down just enough so it wouldn't wake anyone else, and I let that song play on repeat. Over and over. I stayed completely still, staring at the ceiling, afraid to look at the mirror again, afraid to turn my head, afraid to move. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. When I woke up in the morning, sunlight filled the room. Everything looked normal. The door was closed, The closet was empty. The mirror reflected nothing unusual. My dad and brother acted like it was any other day. I didn't tell anyone right away. I didn't know how to explain what I had seen. I didn't know if they would believe me. But I know what I heard. I know what I felt. And I know what I saw in that mirror. That night changed me. To this day, I cannot sleep in a room with a mirror facing my bed. I cannot leave doors cracked open at night. And no matter how silly it sounds, I still feel safer with music playing when the house goes quiet. Worst night of my life. And somehow, for reasons I still don't understand, that song made it stop. I was really young when this happened, and for a long time, I tried to tell myself it was just a kid being dumb. Maybe it was. Maybe I made a mistake and overreacted. But even now, years later, when I think back on it, my chest tightens in the same way it did that day. I still remember how real the fear felt, how fast my heart was beating, and how alone I felt in those few minutes. Whatever it was, it stuck with me. I had just gotten a brand new bike. It was one of those moments that felt huge when you're a kid. New bike, shiny paint, smooth tires, the kind of thing that makes you feel like you suddenly have freedom. I couldn't wait to ride it. The problem was that my parents had very clear rules. I was not allowed to leave our street. I could ride up and down, back and forth, but that was it. No nearby neighborhoods, no shortcuts, no exploring. I agreed. At least, I said I agreed. The truth is, the moment my parents turned their backs, I broke that rule. I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't so young that I didn't understand right from wrong. I knew I'd get in trouble if I got caught. I just didn't care. The excitement of riding that bike and the curiosity of what was beyond my street felt stronger than the fear of punishment. So I pedaled off. At first, everything felt normal. I rode into a nearby neighborhood, one I had seen plenty of times but never explored on my own. The houses looked similar, the streets were quiet, and nothing seemed out of place. I remember feeling proud, like I was getting away with something. I was just riding, minding my own business, enjoying the feeling of speed and independence. That's when the van showed up. It pulled up alongside me slowly. Not fast, not aggressive, just enough to match my speed. I remember glancing over and seeing a man in the driver's seat. He rolled his window down and asked if I needed a ride. I said no. That should have been the end of it. A normal person would have driven away. But he didn't. Instead, he kept talking. He asked questions. Where was I going? How far was my house? Was I tired? He kept insisting, even though I had already said no. Something about the way he spoke made my stomach drop. I can't explain it clearly. It wasn't just the words, it was the tone, the persistence, the fact that he didn't accept my answer. Every instinct in my body started screaming that something was wrong. I didn't argue. I didn't try to be polite. I just turned my bike around and started pedaling as fast as I could back toward home. I didn't look back at first. I just rode. Then I realized something that made my blood run cold. The van wasn't gone. I glanced back and saw the man making a U-turn. Not slowly, not casually. He was turning around to follow me. Panic hit me all at once. I pedaled harder than I ever had in my life. My legs burned. My lungs felt like they were going to burst. I didn't care. All I could think was that I needed to get away. I needed to get home. To get back to my street, I had to cross a busy road. Normally, I would have stopped and waited. That day, I didn't. I barely slowed down. I shot across the street without thinking, narrowly missing cars that honked and slammed on their brakes. I didn't even look at the drivers. I just kept going. Instead of riding straight to my street, I made a split-second decision. I turned down the street that ran behind my house. My neighbor lived there, and their yard backed up to ours. I knew their fence was shorter. I knew I could climb it. I raced into their driveway, jumped off my bike, and abandoned it right there. I didn't even bother laying it down carefully. I just dropped it and ran. Their yard felt enormous in that moment. Every step felt slow, like I was moving through water. I reached the fence, scrambled over it, scraped my hands and legs, and then reached over the taller fence that separated their yard from mine. I grabbed the top, swung my body, and dropped into my own backyard. The moment my feet hit the ground, I crouched down and held my breath. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I slowly crept toward the wooden fence and looked through one of the small gaps between the boards. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would give me away. That's when I saw the van. It was driving slowly down my neighbor's street. Way too slowly. The man was clearly scanning the area. He stopped near my neighbor's house, looking toward the yard where my bike was sitting in plain view. My stomach sank. I realized what he must be thinking. He probably assumed that house was mine. The van sat there for what felt like forever. Seconds stretched into something unbearable. I remember thinking that if he got out of the van, I didn't know what I would do. I felt trapped in my own backyard, too scared to run, too scared to scream. Eventually, the van drove away. Not fast. Not in a rush. Just gone. The moment it disappeared, my legs gave out. I sat down in the grass and started crying. Not quiet crying. Full, shaking sobs. The kind that makes your chest hurt and your throat burn. I was safe, but the fear hadn't left yet. It lingered, heavy and suffocating. I stayed in the backyard for a long time before I worked up the courage to go inside. I didn't go get my bike. I couldn't. I didn't even want to look at it. My neighbor eventually noticed it and brought it back to me later, probably thinking nothing of it. I never told my parents what happened. At the time, I was more afraid of getting in trouble than anything else. I knew I had broken the rule. I knew they would be angry. In my kid logic, that felt worse than explaining what had happened. I convinced myself it wasn't that big of a deal, that I had handled it, that nothing actually happened. Looking back now, I realize how wrong that thinking was. I didn't ride my bike much after that. When I did, I stayed close to home. I watched every car that passed. I flinched when vans slowed down. I didn't trust strangers the same way anymore. It might sound small to some people. Nothing really happened, after all. But to me, that moment mattered. Something could have happened. And the fact that I still remember every detail tells me that my fear wasn't imaginary. I was just a kid who wanted to ride a new bike. And for a few terrifying minutes, I learned how quickly that kind of innocence can disappear. When I was about 13 years old, my grandparents owned a house right on the water. It was one of those places that felt like a secret world when you were a kid. The house sat on a long, narrow peninsula, surrounded on almost all sides by water and thick woods. The trees were tall and old, packed close together, and during the summer the leaves were so dense that sunlight barely reached the ground in some places. It always smelled like damp earth, moss, and lake water. Because my grandparents lived in Florida for about half the year, they treated the house like a family vacation place. All of their adult children were free to use it whenever they wanted. That meant that every now and then, my parents would take us there for weekends or longer stays. To me, it felt like absolute freedom. There were no neighbors close by, no traffic, on no noise except insects, birds, and the occasional splash of something moving through the water. The woods around the house were crisscrossed with streams. Some were shallow and easy to hop across, while others were surprisingly deep and slow-moving. Over time, water had carved out pockets along these streams, creating little swimming holes. They weren't official or marked or anything like that. They were just places kids discovered and claimed. One of these swimming holes became my favorite. I don't know the exact depth anymore. At the time, it felt enormous. I remember thinking it had to be at least 12 or 15 feet deep. The water was dark and cloudy, especially once you went more than a few feet under the surface. You couldn't see the bottom clearly at all, just vague shapes and shadows. Even as a kid, I knew it was probably not the safest place to swim, but that didn't really register in my mind as something to avoid. It just made it more exciting. What made this spot even better was the rope swing. Someone, at some point long before I ever found the place, had tied a thick rope around a sturdy tree limb that hung out over the water. The rope was rough and weathered, but strong. You could grab it, run forward, swing out over the water, and let go at just the right moment. If you timed it perfectly, you'd fly out and drop straight down into the deepest part of the hole. To a kid, it felt like the coolest thing in the world. Looking back now, I realize how reckless it all was. The water was deep, the visibility was terrible, and there was no adult supervision anywhere nearby. But at 13, you don't think about those things. And you think you're invincible. You think nothing bad can happen to you. One afternoon, my parents decided to take a nap. The house was quiet, and the air was warm and still. I remember lying there, bored, listening to the distant sounds of water and insects drifting through the open windows. That's when I got the idea that it would be the perfect time to go swimming. Alone. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't ask permission. I just slipped out of the house and made my way through the woods toward the swimming hole. The path wasn't well defined, but I knew it by heart. I'd walked it enough times to recognize the way the ground dipped, where the roots stuck out, where the light changed. When I reached the swimming hole, everything looked the same as always. The water was calm, the rope hanging still from the tree branch. No one else was around. It felt peaceful and inviting. That's when another idea popped into my head. I wondered if I could touch the bottom. I had never tried before. I had jumped in plenty of times, but I always let myself float back up without really pushing it. That day, I decided to see just how deep it really was. I told myself it would be quick. I'd drop down, touch the bottom, and push back up. Simple. I pulled the rope back as far as I could, stepping backward until I was on my tiptoes. My arms were stretched, the rope tight. I took a breath, ran forward as fast as I could, and felt that familiar moment of weightlessness as my feet left the ground. Then I let go. The fall felt longer than usual. The water swallowed me instantly, the cold shock hitting my skin as I sank. I didn't fight it. I let myself drop straight down. I'm counting in my head, watching the light fade as everything turned darker and murkier. To my surprise, I actually hit the bottom. My feet touched something solid, and for a split second, I felt proud. I had done it. I reached the bottom. Without thinking too much about it, I pushed off with my legs, expecting to shoot back up toward the surface. Instead, I barely moved. I felt myself go up a few inches, and then something yanked me back down. At first, I was just confused. I tried again, kicking harder this time. Again, nothing. I went nowhere. That's when panic began to creep in. I looked down and tried to figure out what was happening, but the water was too cloudy. All I could see were vague shapes. In my mind, I realized that my swimming trunks must have gotten caught on something. Probably a submerged stump or a log. But fear doesn't listen to logic, especially when you're underwater and running out of air. In my panicked brain, it felt like something had grabbed me. I started struggling. I twisted my body, kicked, pulled at my shorts. anything I could think of. Each movement burned energy I didn't have. My lungs started screaming for air. The pressure in my chest became unbearable. Then my vision started to change. The edges of my sight began to darken, like someone slowly closing curtains around the world. Bright spots flashed in front of my eyes, little bursts of light that made it hard to focus. My lungs felt like they were on fire, like they were collapsing inward. Every instinct in my body was telling me to breathe, but I couldn't. I could feel myself starting to lose control. My limbs felt heavy, sluggish. My thoughts slowed down. The fight was draining out of me, replaced by a terrifying sense of fading away. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I was about to die. And then something happened. Through the murky water, I saw movement. A shape appeared near me. At first, I thought my brain was just making things up, like flashes in a dream. But the shape came closer, more defined. Hands reached for me. Those hands grabbed my shorts and pulled hard. I felt fabric tear. Suddenly, the pressure holding me down was gone. Someone grabbed me, wrapped an arm around me, and pushed upward. We shot toward the surface. The next thing I remember is bursting out of the water and sucking in air so hard it hurt. I coughed and gasped, barely able to keep myself afloat. When I looked around, I was alone. There was no one there. No adult. No other swimmer. No sign of anyone who could have saved me. The rope was still hanging motionless. The woods were silent. The water rippled gently, as if nothing had happened at all. The only physical proof of what I'd been through was a large tear in one leg of my bathing suit. I swam to the edge as fast as I could and dragged myself out, collapsing onto the muddy bank. I lay there for a long time, shaking, trying to catch my breath and understand what had just happened. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Eventually, I made my way back to the house. I didn't tell my parents what had happened. I didn't know how. I wasn't even sure what I believed myself. Over the years, I've thought about that moment countless times. I've gone back and forth about what really happened down there. And part of me is convinced that the figure I saw was nothing more than my oxygen-starved brain creating something to save itself. A hallucination. A last, desperate effort of survival. I think that somehow, in that final moment, my body found the strength to tear free. That the same instinct forced me upward, whether through swimming or buoyancy or sheer luck. The human mind is powerful, especially when it believes it's about to die. But even knowing all that, there's still a part of me that can't fully explain how real it felt. How clear the sensation of being grabbed was. How distinct that presence seemed. That swimming hole sat above my head for years, waiting quietly while I slept in my grandparents' house. And every time I think about it, I remember just how close I came to never leaving it at all. I just want to start by saying that I have never been the kind of person who gets wrapped up in ghost stories or paranormal stuff. Even when I was younger, I always thought those kinds of stories were exaggerated or made up. I never really believed in haunted houses or spirits or anything like that. I was always the person who looked for logic first. If something strange happened, there had to be a normal explanation somewhere. That mindset stayed with me for a long time, and honestly, it still does. But there was one experience a few years ago that shook that confidence in a way I still can't fully explain. It wasn't dramatic or violent or filled with screaming or shadows. Nothing jumped out at us. Nothing chased us. And maybe that's exactly why it stuck with me. It was simple, quiet, and completely unexplainable. At least to me. At the time, my mom worked in real estate. Her job required her to visit houses before showing them to potential buyers. Most of the time she did this alone, just to get a feel for the place, check the layout, and make sure everything was ready. Sometimes, though, she would take me with her. I didn't mind going along. It was something to do, and I got to see different houses. Some old, some new, some nice, some not so nice. One day, a house came on the market that a few other agents had already been talking about. They were saying things like, the house felt strange, or that it might be haunted. I remember my mom laughing it off. She didn't believe in that stuff either, but she thought it would be interesting to check it out, and she figured I might get a kick out of it. So she brought me along. When we pulled up to the house, but the first thing I noticed was how overgrown it looked. The outside of the house was almost completely covered in vines. Thick, twisting vines climbed up the walls and wrapped around windows and railings. It looked like nature was slowly trying to take the house back. Still, it didn't feel supernatural. It just felt old and neglected. Plenty of houses look like that if they've been empty for a while. We unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air immediately felt stale, like the house hadn't been lived in for some time. That old, dusty smell hit me, the kind you get in places where the windows stay closed too long. But again, nothing unusual. A lot of empty houses smell like that. The first floor was pretty normal. The furniture was still there, which I remember thinking was odd, but not unheard of. Sometimes owners leave things behind when they move, especially if they plan to sell quickly. The living room was dim, even though it was daytime, because heavy curtains blocked most of the sunlight. That made the house feel darker than it probably needed to be. One thing that stood out to me was the television. It was one of those old box-style TVS, the kind you don't really see anymore. It was on, playing an old black and white documentary about World War II. The sound was low, almost like background noise. Seeing that old footage playing in such a quiet, empty house gave the place a strange, heavy feeling. It made the house feel stuck in time, like it hadn't moved forward with the rest of the world. Still, nothing scared me. It just felt a little gloomy. We walked through the rest of the first floor, then checking the kitchen and a few other rooms. Everything seemed fine. Nothing moved, no strange sounds, no cold spots, nothing that screamed haunted house. If anything, I was starting to think the other agents were just overreacting. Eventually, we went upstairs to look at the bedrooms. The second floor was laid out in a simple way. There was a long hallway with a few doors spaced out along it. The hallway itself felt narrow, and the lighting wasn't great, which made it feel longer than it actually was. The first bedroom we checked was completely normal. Empty, plain, nothing special about it. We didn't spend much time in there. We moved on to the next room. As soon as we opened the door to the second bedroom, I remember stopping for a moment. The room was filled with stuffed animals. Not toy stuffed animals, but real ones. Mounted animals. Heads on the walls. Full-bodied animals posed around the room. It felt like walking into a hunting lodge, except this was a bedroom. There were deer, birds, and other animals I couldn't even identify right away. Even though I found it strange, the room itself was neat. Everything looked intentionally placed. Nothing was broken or messy. It didn't feel threatening, just unsettling in a quiet way. My mom commented on how unusual it was, and we looked around briefly before deciding to move on. I remember wanting to get out of that room quickly, but not because I was scared. It just made me uncomfortable. The final bedroom at the end of the hallway was normal again. Plain walls, empty space, nothing worth mentioning. After checking that room, we turned around and started heading back down the hallway toward the stairs. As we passed the second bedroom again, something made me look back. I don't know why. I didn't hear anything. I didn't feel a chill. I just had the sudden urge to glance into the room one more time. The moment I looked in, I stopped walking. My heart dropped into my stomach. There was now a chair sitting directly in the center of the room. It wasn't tucked against a wall. It wasn't half hidden behind anything. It was placed right in the middle, as if someone had carefully positioned it there. I immediately said something to my mom, and she stopped too. We both stood there staring into the room. We both knew that chair had not been there before. When we first walked into the room, it had been open and clear. If that chair had been there, we would have bumped into it. There was no way we could have missed it. When we hadn't left each other's side at any point, neither of us had gone back into the room alone. There was no one else in the house. And yet, there it was. I felt my skin prickle, like my body was reacting before my mind could catch up. My mom didn't say much. She just shook her head slightly, as if trying to process it herself. We didn't investigate further. We didn't step into the room again. We didn't touch the chair. We just turned around and went downstairs, both of us suddenly very aware of how quiet the house was. We left the house shortly after that. The door closed behind us, and the fresh air outside felt like a relief. Neither of us said much while walking back to the car. What bothered me the most about that experience wasn't fear in the traditional sense. It wasn't like I felt something evil or threatening. It was the lack of explanation. I consider myself a logical person. I like to believe that there's a reason behind things, even strange ones. But no matter how many times I replay that moment in my head, I can't come up with a reasonable explanation. A chair doesn't just appear in the middle of a room. We were the only ones there. We were together the entire time. There was no sound of movement, no footsteps, no dragging noise, nothing. In the years after that, the house was sold several times. I heard later that almost every new owner eventually moved out, claiming strange things happened while they lived there. Things moving, sounds at night, a constant feeling that they weren't welcome. Like the house didn't want anyone staying too long. I still don't know what I believe. I'm not suddenly convinced that ghosts are real, or that the house was truly haunted. But I can't ignore that something happened there that day, something I can't explain. And that's what still bothers me. Not knowing. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. This happened during my senior year of college, over Christmas break in 2006. And it is still the single most frightening experience of my life. I've had scares before, moments that made my heart jump or my nerves spike. But nothing has ever come close to the level of fear I felt that night. Even now, thinking back on it, I can still feel that tight, uneasy sensation in my chest, like my body remembers something my brain would rather forget. At the time, I was working for one of my professors. He was a good guy, older, well-respected, and lived a very different kind of life from most people I knew. He owned a massive piece of land out in the middle of nowhere. When I say nowhere, I mean miles from anything that even resembled a town. No close neighbors, no streetlights, no passing traffic. Just land, trees, fields, and darkness once the sun went down. He was heading out of town for a few days to attend a bowl game that his college team had qualified for, and he asked me if I could house sit and dog sit while he was gone. It sounded like an easy gig, and honestly, a pretty cool one. The place was huge, and he had all kinds of things on the property. Horses, ponds for fishing, trails, and even one of those small utility vehicles, a gator that you could ride around on. It felt more like a private ranch than a regular home. I agreed right away and figured I might as well make the most of it. I invited my girlfriend at the time to stay with me. We thought it would be fun, almost like a mini vacation. 3 days alone on a big property, no responsibilities other than feeding animals and making sure the house didn't burn down. What could go wrong? But the first night was completely uneventful. We arrived, got settled in, fed the animals, and explored a little before it got dark. Once night fell, the place felt quiet, but not in a scary way. More like peaceful silence, the kind of quiet you get when there's no traffic, no neighbors, no city noise. We watched TV, laughed, went to bed, and slept just fine. The second night was the same. Nothing strange happened. The dog, a small, fluffy little thing that looked like it had no business living in the middle of nowhere, was calm. The horses were fine. No weird noises, no strange feelings. By that point, we were completely comfortable. Any nervous thoughts we might have had about being so isolated were gone. Then came the third night. It started out normal enough. We ate dinner, watched some TV, and were just winding down for the night when the dog started acting strange. She suddenly began barking at the back door. Not her usual little yappy bark either. This was persistent, frantic barking, like she was genuinely upset about something. At first, we brushed it off. Out there, animals were everywhere. Coyotes, raccoons, deer. It wasn't unusual for something to wander close to the house. Still, the barking didn't stop. It went on, and eventually it started to get under our skin. We decided to lock the dog inside, figuring if there really was something outside, we didn't want her getting hurt. I tried to stay calm and logical, telling my girlfriend that it was probably just an animal passing through and that everything was fine. But even as I said it, I could feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The house didn't feel as comfortable anymore. Then the dog ran to the other side of the house and started barking at a window there. Same intense barking, same urgency. At that point, the mood completely changed. We weren't laughing anymore. We weren't relaxed. We were both paying very close attention to every sound. The silence between the barking felt heavier, like the house itself was holding its breath. My girlfriend, who was never exactly known for making the smartest decisions in tense situations, suddenly decided she wanted to go outside and see what was going on. I told her that was a bad idea, but she insisted. Against my better judgment, I let her go. I made a joke to lighten the mood. Something stupid, but inside I was on edge. She stepped outside and disappeared into the darkness around the house. I stood by the door, I'm listening. After a moment, she came back in and said she saw something small and gray that ran off. Probably a coyote, she said. That explanation made sense, and for a brief moment, I felt relieved. Still, the fear didn't completely go away. We locked everything up again and tried to settle down for bed. We turned off the lights, climbed under the covers, and lay there in silence. Not the comfortable silence of before, but an awkward, tense silence, where both of us were clearly listening for something. That's when I heard it. At first, I wasn't even sure it was real. It was faint, distant, almost blending into the background noise of the night. It sounded like singing. Soft, slow singing. A melody, gentle and eerie at the same time. It sounded like a young girl singing a lullaby. My heart started pounding. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just lay there, hoping with everything in me that my brain was playing tricks on me. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe some strange animal sound that just happened to sound human. I didn't want to acknowledge it out loud, because once you do that, it becomes real. Then my girlfriend spoke. She whispered, "Let's get the fuck out of here." I asked her why, already knowing the answer but desperately hoping I was wrong. She said, "You didn't hear that little girl singing?" That was it. Every ounce of doubt vanished in that moment. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone in hearing it. Whatever that sound was, it was real. I didn't argue. I didn't question it. I just said, "Okay, let's get the fuck out." And we moved. We got out of bed, grabbed our clothes, and got dressed as fast as possible. I remember my hands shaking so badly I could barely manage buttons and zippers. The house felt different now. Bigger. Darker. Every shadow felt like it was watching us. We didn't turn on extra lights. We didn't stop to look around. We just made our way to the front door as quietly and quickly as we could. The dog was still restless, pacing and whining. As we stepped outside, the night air felt thick and heavy. The darkness out there was absolute. No streetlights, no neighboring houses, just blackness stretching in every direction. The silence was worse than the noise had been. I was so scared that I called someone on my phone and asked them to stay on the line with me while we walked to the car. I didn't care how ridiculous it sounded. I just needed to hear another human voice. We reached the car, got in, and drove away as fast as we could without even looking back at the house. I don't remember the drive clearly. I just remember wanting distance between us and that place. The next morning, in daylight, I went back alone to clean up the house and take care of things before my professor returned. In the sunlight, everything looked normal again. Peaceful, even. No signs of anything unusual. No explanation for what we had heard. But I know what I heard. And more importantly, I know that someone else heard it too. That night remains the most scared I have ever been. Ever. When this happened, I was already living in a way that most people never experience. And I think that context matters. About 8 years ago, I ran away from a foster home situation that had become unsafe and unbearable. I won't go into every detail of why I left. But it wasn't a dramatic or impulsive decision. It was something that built up over time. A constant sense that staying would eventually break me in ways I couldn't fix. Leaving felt terrifying, but staying felt worse. Once I left, my life changed completely. I didn't have a car, didn't have steady money, and didn't have anyone watching out for me. I walked everywhere. Walking became my default state. I walked through neighborhoods, along highways, through small towns and stretches of nothing. Sometimes I would hitch short rides, but most of the time I relied on my own feet. You start to understand distance differently when you live like that. A few miles isn't close. It's exhausting. It's time. It's blisters and sore muscles and aching joints. I did what I could to survive. I found side jobs whenever possible. Yard work, cleaning, helping someone move furniture, anything that paid cash. I rationed food carefully and learned how little I could survive on. Sometimes I offered people a few dollars just to let me sleep on their property, maybe in a yard or near a shed. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than being completely exposed. You learn to accept discomfort quickly when comfort isn't an option. Living like that also forces you to become extremely aware of your surroundings. You learn to read body language, tone, movement. You learn to listen more than you speak. Once you learn how to keep your guard up without looking panicked, because looking scared can make you a target. Over time, that awareness becomes automatic. On this particular day, I had actually caught a small break. I managed to line up a side job in a nearby town. It wasn't glamorous work, but it meant money, and money meant food. I remember feeling genuinely relieved, maybe even hopeful, which was rare at that point in my life. The only problem was the distance. The town was about 8 miles away. 8 miles doesn't sound like much when you're used to cars and buses, but when you're walking on the side of the road, carrying everything you own, it feels endless. The road stretched out ahead of me, long and quiet. No sidewalks, just asphalt, dirt shoulders, and occasional passing cars. The weather wasn't terrible, but it wasn't comfortable either. My legs were already tired before I was halfway there. I walked and walked, my thoughts drifting between focusing on the road and keeping track of time. I was tired, but not careless. I never let my guard down completely. That's why I noticed the pickup truck as soon as I heard it coming from behind me. I didn't turn my head right away. I listened first. The sound of the engine, the speed, the way it slowed as it passed. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. An older pickup truck, 2 men inside. Almost immediately, the truck braked hard, did a sharp U-turn, and pulled over on the side of the road just ahead of me. The tires kicked up dust. The engine idled loudly. My stomach dropped in that instant way you feel when something is wrong and you know it. They started yelling out the window. Vulgar comments. Sexual remarks. Laughing like it was all a joke. I kept my face forward and didn't respond. I knew better than to engage. But my body was already tense, every sense on high alert. I listened as doors opened and footsteps hit the pavement. I counted those steps without even thinking about it. It's something you do when you're scared but trying to stay calm. Suddenly, the talking stopped. No footsteps, no voices. That silence felt heavier than the noise. I picked up my pace, trying not to look like I was panicking. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. They weren't just standing there anymore. They were spreading out, trying to come at me from different angles, flanking me. That was the moment everything snapped into clarity. I ran. I didn't hesitate or second-guess myself. I ran as hard as I could, and every ounce of energy went into speed. I was grateful for every hour I'd ever spent playing sports, especially soccer. My legs knew how to move even when my brain was overwhelmed with fear. I could hear the truck start up behind me, the engine roaring as it followed. I didn't look back. I didn't slow down. I focused on one thing only: getting to people. As I reached the edge of town, buildings started appearing. Parking lots, signs, a few scattered businesses. I saw a pediatric office ahead, and in front of it, a couple walking to their car with a baby carrier. That sight felt like a lifeline. I ran straight toward them. My voice was shaking. My words rushed and messy, but I got them out. I told them I needed help. I told them men in a truck had been following me. I pointed toward the parking lot where the pickup was now circling slowly. I remember saying something like, "I know this sounds crazy, but I'm not. Please, can I get a ride?" They looked shocked and scared, but they didn't dismiss me. They didn't argue. They opened the car door and let me in. The moment I was inside and the door locked, my body finally reacted. I started shaking uncontrollably. The adrenaline dumped all at once, leaving me weak and dizzy. The truck lingered for a moment, then drove off. The couple drove me into town and dropped me off where I said I needed to go. Before they left, they told me they were calling the police. I thanked them over and over. I don't think they realized how much that small act of trust meant to me. What they didn't know was that I was technically a wanted runaway at the time. If police had found me, things could have gotten complicated. But in that moment, I didn't care. Being caught would have been better than what almost happened on that road. That experience wasn't an isolated incident. Living the way I was living exposed me to the darker side of people more than once. I learned how common predators are, how bold they can be, and how quickly a situation can turn dangerous. It's not paranoia when it's based on experience. That day stayed with me, not just because it was terrifying, but because it reinforced lessons that kept me alive afterward. Pay attention. Trust your instincts. Don't worry about seeming rude or dramatic. Use your strengths. Run when you need to run. And don't be afraid to ask strangers for help if your safety depends on it. I survived because I listened to that instinct and acted fast. And I will never forget how close I came to not getting away at all. I have wanted to tell this story for a long time, but every time I think about it, I feel that same chill run through me. Even now, years later, it still affects me in ways I can't fully explain. This isn't something I ever wanted to believe in, and it's not something I share lightly. But everything I'm about to describe truly happened, and the memories of it live with me every single day. When I was 19 years old, I met a girl who would end up changing my life forever. We fell into a relationship quickly, the way young people often do, without thinking too far ahead. We were in love, or at least we believed we were. Not long after, we had 2 beautiful daughters together. Like many young couples, we struggled. Money was always tight. Stress was constant. We were learning how to be adults while already being parents. My girlfriend was of native background. She had grown up on a reserve, but moved into the city to live with me. In 2005, we were renting a small house and trying to make things work for the sake of our kids. Life was difficult, but it felt manageable at the time. That year, her youngest brother came to stay with us for a couple of weeks. His name was Clinton. He was only 16 years old, quiet, respectful, and genuinely a good kid. He helped out around the house, was kind to our daughters, and never caused trouble. There was nothing about him that felt strange or unsettling. Until one night. We were all asleep when I suddenly woke up to a sound coming from the living room. Clinton had been sleeping on the couch. At first, I couldn't quite register what I was hearing. It wasn't a normal noise. It wasn't talking or crying. It was something else entirely. I got out of bed and walked toward the living room. Clinton was still asleep, but he had sat upright on the couch. His eyes were closed, yet he was making this deep, haunting sound. He was howling, not yelling, not screaming, howling like a wolf. It was low, raw, and primitive in a way I had never heard from a human being before. The sound felt ancient, like it didn't belong in a modern house. I stood there frozen, watching him. After a moment, he stopped, slowly lay back down, and continued sleeping like nothing had happened. I didn't wake him. I didn't tell anyone about it at the time. I convinced myself it was just a bad dream or some kind of night terror. A few days later, Clinton did something that struck me as odd. He invited my girlfriend and me out to dinner. Not just anywhere, but to the Keg, which is an expensive restaurant. I remember thinking how strange it was for a 16-year-old kid to insist on paying for such a meal. He was smiling, calm, almost proud to be treating us. The whole dinner felt off, like there was a weight behind it I couldn't place. The very next morning, we woke up, and Clinton was gone. At first, we assumed he had gone out early, or decided to head back to the reserve. Then the phone rang. He had been killed in a car accident on his way back home. I still remember the way the room felt when we got that call. Heavy. Silent. My girlfriend collapsed into tears. I didn't know what to say or do. My mind immediately went back to that night in the living room. The howling. The dinner. I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow he had known. That something in him understood he was leaving, even if consciously he didn't. At Clinton's funeral, the pain in the family was overwhelming. His older brother, Joe, was completely broken. He cried openly, clung to Clinton's tombstone, and refused to leave. Watching him was heartbreaking. It felt like watching someone unravel. After the funeral, there was a traditional fire held for Clinton. People gathered around, sharing stories and memories. As I sat there, staring into the flames, I looked up at the sky. A single black crow was circling above us, over and over again. What struck me was how alone it was. As far as I could see in any direction, there were no other birds. Just that one black shape moving in slow, endless loops above the fire. About a month later, we were back home when we got another phone call. Joe had been killed in a car accident near the reserve. On the same way Clinton had died. It didn't feel real. It felt like some horrible echo repeating itself. At Joe's funeral, I watched my girlfriend the way I had watched Joe at Clinton's. She clung to the tombstone, crying, refusing to let go. Again, there was a fire held after the burial. And again, I looked up at the sky. This time there were 2 black birds circling the fire. Only 2. Nothing else in the sky. Something inside me shifted at that moment. I didn't say anything. But I knew. I didn't know what it meant exactly, but I knew it wasn't coincidence. A couple of months later, my girlfriend woke up one morning shaken and pale. She told me she had dreamed that our house burned down and that all of us died in the fire. She was already very superstitious and believed that her family was under some kind of curse, when that dream terrified her. She packed up our children and decided to stay at a friend's house for a night or 2, just to be safe. While she was gone, I ran into an old high school friend named Tim. We bonded over music, always had. We decided to hang out at my place and jam for the night. We played music for hours, laughed, drank a little, and eventually, he went home. I fell asleep on the couch. The next morning, I went to work like normal. About an hour into my shift, I got a phone call. My house was on fire. I rushed back, and what I saw looked unreal. Police tape everywhere. Fire trucks, smoke. The house was completely destroyed, burned down to its bones. There was nothing left. If my girlfriend and children had been there, they would not have survived. There is no doubt in my mind about that. After that, everything fell apart. My girlfriend and I eventually separated. I gained custody of our daughters. She moved back to the reserve to be with her family. Later, I met someone new and eventually remarried. My children lived with me and my new wife and visited their mother on weekends. In December of 2007, my ex-girlfriend called me from the reserve. She was asking about taking the kids for Christmas break. I could hear something in her voice that I had never heard before. It was shaky, heavy, full of sadness. I can't explain it properly, but it felt like a goodbye. An hour later, her sister called me in hysterics. My ex-girlfriend had been killed in a car accident on her way home from work. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt and was the only one who died in the crash. Telling my daughters that their mother was gone was the hardest thing I have ever done. At her funeral, as I was leaving the reserve, I felt something wash over me. Calm, acceptance. I knew, without thinking, that if I looked up, I would see 3 black birds. I looked. There they were, 3 blackbirds circling above. I knew it was her and her brothers, and for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Months later, during the trial of the drunk driver who killed her, my new wife and I were talking in bed about a newspaper article. I mentioned how much it bothered me. My wife, without thinking, said something cruel about my ex. The next morning, I walked outside to go to work and stopped dead in my tracks. My car was completely covered in bird droppings. Not a little. Completely. Like dozens of birds had targeted it all at once. There were no trees around, no birds anywhere else, no other cars touched. I knew. Since that time, I have never looked at blackbirds the same way. To me, they are not just birds anymore. They are reminders, messengers, proof that some things follow us beyond what we can see. All of it connects now, in ways I didn't understand back then. And whether anyone believes it or not, I know what I lived through. When this happened, I was very young, probably around 7 or 8 years old. And at that age, your world is still small. Your bedroom feels like the safest place on earth. Your house feels familiar, and you trust that nothing bad can happen while you're asleep. That night was one of the first times in my life where that sense of safety cracked. And even now, years later, I can remember the fear with uncomfortable clarity. It started out as a completely normal evening. My sister and I were downstairs watching television together. Our parents had already gone to bed, and we were doing what kids always do, trying to squeeze in a bit more time awake before being told to go to sleep. The TV was playing some random show, and the house had that quiet nighttime feeling, where the lights are dim and everything feels slower. For some reason, I had a sleeping bag with me downstairs. I honestly don't remember why. It might have been from a sleepover, or maybe I had dragged it down earlier because I thought it would be fun to sit in. At that age, things like that didn't need a reason. You just did them. The sleeping bag was bright and bulky, and I remember thinking it would be cool to sleep in it instead of under my usual blankets. Eventually, the tiredness caught up with us. My sister yawned and said she was going to bed, and I followed soon after. I rolled up the sleeping bag, carried it upstairs, and walked into my bedroom. Everything looked exactly the same as always. My posters were on the walls, my toys were where I left them, and nothing felt off in any way. I climbed onto my bed, laid the sleeping bag out on top of the mattress, zipped myself inside, and fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't know how long I had been asleep when I suddenly woke up, but it felt abrupt, like being snapped out of a dream. What woke me was the sensation of something hitting the mattress right next to my face. It wasn't touching me directly, but it was close enough that I felt the movement through the bed. The mattress dipped and rebounded slightly, like someone had slapped or punched it. At first, I didn't fully panic. I was still half asleep, and my brain was slow to catch up. I remember lying there with my eyes open, staring into the darkness, trying to understand what had just happened. I listened carefully. The room was quiet. No footsteps, no voices, no movement. Just the normal sounds of a house at night. I tried to rationalize it, even as a kid. Maybe I had moved suddenly in my sleep. Maybe the sleeping bag shifted. Maybe something fell off the bed. None of those explanations felt quite right, but I was tired. And tired kids are very good at convincing themselves to ignore things. So, after a few seconds, I closed my eyes again and tried to go back to sleep. That didn't last long. The second time it happened, there was no doubt about it. Something hit the mattress again, right next to my face. But this time it was harder. Much harder. The force was stronger, like whatever it was wanted to make sure I was awake. The bed jolted, and I felt it through my whole body. My eyes flew open and my heart started racing instantly. I wasn't sleepy anymore. I was fully awake and terrified. That deep, instinctive fear hit me. The kind that doesn't come from thinking, but from pure reaction. My chest felt tight, and I remember feeling suddenly very cold. I didn't stay in bed to figure it out. I didn't sit there and listen. I bolted. I jumped out of bed, ran into the hallway, and went straight to my sister's room. I burst in without knocking and started talking all at once, trying to explain what had happened. I told her that something had hit my bed, right next to my face, and that it happened twice. I was probably shaking, my voice probably too loud, but I didn't care. I just didn't want to be alone. At first, she brushed it off. She told me I was probably dreaming or imagining things. She said I was being silly, and that I should just go back to bed. That reaction hurt more than I expected, because it made me feel stupid on top of being scared. But I insisted. I told her I wasn't making it up, that I was really scared, and that I didn't want to go back into my room. I asked if I could sleep in the other bed in her room. She hesitated, but eventually agreed. I think she could tell that I was genuinely frightened. I climbed into the spare bed, pulling the covers up tightly around me. Even though I was still scared, Being in her room made me feel a little safer. At least I wasn't alone anymore. The house was quiet again. That deep, heavy nighttime silence settled in. We both lay there, not talking, probably listening more closely than usual to every small sound. I was starting to calm down just a little when it happened. There was a loud bang. It came from my room. It wasn't a soft noise. It wasn't something subtle that you could easily explain away. It was loud enough that we both jumped. My heart felt like it stopped for a second before slamming back into motion. We sat up in our beds, staring at each other in the dark. I didn't have to say anything. The look on her face told me she heard it too. Neither of us went to check right away. The idea of walking back down the hallway toward my room felt unbearable. We stayed where we were, frozen, listening, waiting to see if anything else would happen. Nothing did. The house went silent again, as if whatever caused the noise was finished. Eventually, we managed to fall asleep. But it wasn't a restful sleep. I remember waking up several times during the night, convinced I had heard something, only to realize everything was quiet. The next morning, we went to my room together. Walking down the hallway in daylight felt completely different. The fear from the night before hadn't fully faded, but it was dulled by sunlight and the sense that daytime brings. When we opened the door to my room, my stomach dropped. All of my posters had fallen off the walls. Not one or two, but all of them. They were scattered across the floor. Outside my room, in the hallway, there were bin bags that had been left there, and those had fallen over as well. Nothing else in the house was disturbed. Just my room and the area right outside it. I didn't sleep in my room for about a week after that. Even during the day, being in there made me uneasy. At night, it felt impossible. I kept thinking about that moment, lying in bed, feeling the mattress move right next to my face. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to understand what it could have been. My parents tried to explain it away. They said posters fall sometimes, that maybe the bin bags shifted, that it was probably nothing. I nodded and pretended to accept their explanations. But deep down, they didn't satisfy me. I knew what I felt that night. I knew how real it was. As I got older, I tried to look back on it logically. I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, or that my memory exaggerated it over time. But no matter how I approach it, I can't fully explain the feeling of something deliberately hitting the bed. Twice, right next to my face. That night changed the way I felt about being alone in the dark. It planted a seed of fear that never completely went away. Even now, as an adult, I sometimes think about it when I'm lying awake at night and the house is quiet. Whatever happened in that room, it was real enough to terrify a child in a way that stayed with them forever. During one summer break when I was home from college, I took a job that seemed simple and harmless at first. A couple of my friends were already doing it, and it paid just enough to keep gas in my car and food in my fridge. We worked as morning cleaners at the local movie theater. It was one of those big standalone theaters built in the early 1990s, not inside a mall, surrounded by empty land and long stretches of road. There were 12 screening rooms in total, 3 large screens, 4 medium ones, and 5 smaller theaters tucked farther back in the building. Our shift ran from 4 in the morning until 10. That meant waking up when most people were still deep asleep and driving through pitch-black roads to get to work. The theater was about 20 minutes from where I lived, and the drive always felt longer at that hour. The area around the building was quiet and empty. Before the theater was built, we were told the land had been a mix of wetlands, farmland, and property owned by the local nature center. Even after construction, it still felt isolated, like the building didn't quite belong where it was. The first couple of weeks were completely normal. Boring, even. Usually only 2 or 3 of us worked each shift. Everyone had assigned areas, and you spent most of your time alone, cleaning rows of sticky floors and emptying trash bins while listening to music on your iPod. Sometimes we'd cross paths briefly, nod at each other, maybe complain about spilled soda or broken seats, then go our separate ways again. Occasionally, the day shift would arrive early, and we'd let them know about anything unusual. Broken lights, clogged toilets, or a screen that needed maintenance. One morning, my manager pulled me aside and asked if we had ever noticed the front doors being unlocked when we arrived. I told him no, not that I could remember. He looked uncomfortable, then told me why he asked. Apparently, customers had been complaining, mostly women. They said a tall, skinny man wearing a black suit had been following them from theater to theater. Some claimed he followed them into the bathroom. The descriptions were always similar. Extremely tall, unnaturally thin, wearing an old-fashioned black suit and sometimes a bowler hat. He walked slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world. A few customers were so scared they called the police. But when officers arrived, there was never anyone there. The teenage employees on the day shift had given him a name, or they called him the Tall Man. I didn't know what to think. At the time, I brushed it off as exaggerated stories, maybe misunderstandings, maybe someone's imagination running wild in a dark theater. I laughed it off like anyone would. Looking back, I wish I hadn't. Out of all the screening rooms, one stood out as different. Theater 5. Nobody liked cleaning Theater 5. People avoided it whenever possible, and if someone had to do it, they complained the entire time. When I first started, I didn't understand why. I was new, naive, and not particularly worried about ghost stories or supernatural nonsense. Theater 5 was located behind the bathrooms in the lobby. To reach it, you had to walk down a long, narrow hallway that led away from everything else. At 4 in the morning, that hallway felt especially isolating. And you were far from the rest of the staff, far from the lobby, far from any noise or light. People who cleaned Theater 5 complained about strange things. Nosebleeds, headaches that came out of nowhere, a constant feeling that someone was watching them. Even my boss didn't like going back there, and for some reason, he kept assigning me to clean it. My first strange experience happened on an otherwise normal morning. I had already finished sweeping the lobby and was working my way through Theater 5, picking up cups and popcorn containers before vacuuming. I had my headphones in, music playing, just going through the routine. But something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing behind me. I kept turning around, expecting to see another worker messing with me, but there was no one there. At one point, I even pulled my headphones out and called out, "Hello?" The empty room swallowed my voice. Nothing answered. I told myself I was just tired. Early mornings mess with your head. I went back to work. About 20 minutes later, I was at the top row, sweeping under the seats, when I heard footsteps. Fast footsteps. Someone running. I looked down toward the front of the theater just in time to see a small, blonde-haired boy dart out of the room and turn into the hallway. I didn't think. I dropped my broom and ran after him. There shouldn't have been any kids in the building at that hour. I chased him down the hallway and into the lobby, heart pounding. But there was no one there. No kid. No movement. My boss was outside near the front entrance, smoking a cigarette. I ran up to him and asked, "And who was that kid?" He looked confused for a second. Then he smiled and laughed, like I had just passed some kind of test. "So you met Charlie," he said casually. Charlie, it turned out, was another regular complaint. Customers swore a little blonde boy ran up and down the aisles during movies, making noise and causing disturbances. Ushers would rush in, only to find no one. Charlie was blamed for tipped trash cans, misplaced supplies, and messes that appeared out of nowhere. He was annoying, not scary, and the staff treated him like an invisible troublemaker. Someone jokingly named him Charlie because he looked like the kid from Willy Wonka. Charlie was always seen in Theater 5. A couple of weeks later, I had my encounter with the tall man. Usually, whoever arrived first in the morning had to go upstairs to the projector level and turn on the lights in all the theaters. The projector area was dark, narrow, and lined with life-size cardboard cutouts of movie characters. In daylight, it was fine. In the dark, it felt unsettling. That morning, I was the first one there. I couldn't find the flashlight we usually used, so I decided to do it without one. I had stayed up all night watching old TV shows, and as I walked down the corridor flipping switches, I found myself quietly whistling the Andy Griffith theme song. Halfway down the hallway, I felt it again. That feeling of being watched. I stopped whistling and stared into the darkness ahead. At first, I thought I was looking at another cardboard cutout. They were everywhere, and in low light, it made sense. I took a step closer. Then it moved. The shape I thought was a cutout straightened from a crouch. It began whistling the same tune I had been whistling, but slower, warped, almost mocking. As it stood up fully, I realized how tall it was, at least 7 feet. I couldn't see details, just a silhouette against exit signs and glowing monitors. It started walking toward me, slowly, calmly, with a slight unevenness in its step, like a limp. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. I couldn't move. It took a few steps, then suddenly turned its head, like something else caught its attention. Without a word, it turned and disappeared into one of the offices. That was enough. I ran. I didn't stop until I was outside, waiting for the rest of the crew to arrive. When I told them what happened, nobody laughed. Nobody questioned me, and they just nodded and told me the tall man wouldn't hurt me. I didn't care. I put in my 2 weeks' notice shortly after. To this day, I still think about that theater, about Theater 5, about Charlie, about the tall silhouette whistling back at me in the dark. Some places feel wrong for a reason. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just fade away, they stayed with you. Each one was shared to feel real, quiet, and close. Moments that could happen to anyone. Moments where something felt wrong, or nearly did. If you'd like to keep listening to stories that linger long after they're told, consider subscribing to Sleepy Shadows. There are more waiting in the dark, and not all of them disappear by morning. Good night.